Lena arrived at the Northern Pack's Great Hall the way she arrived at everything, early, quiet, and already calculating the exits. The hall smelled like pine wood and old decisions. High stone walls, 12 pillars holding up a ceiling that had watched 100 years of pack business. She counted the pillars the moment she walked in, the way she counted everything, the way her mother had taught her when they still had a home worth counting things in. She was 26 years old. She had traveled 3 days on horseback from the eastern border territories to stand in this hall. She had not eaten since morning. She did not think about any of that. She stood straight and she waited. The doors at the far end opened. Alpha King Caelan of the Northern Pack walked in like a man who had never once considered the possibility of being wrong. He was tall, dark hair, the kind of jaw that looked like it had been carved out of the same stone as the pillars. His eyes found her immediately, the way they were always going to find her, and she felt it then, that thing she had been warned about, that thing she had privately hoped was just a story old women told to make young girls patient. The bond. It landed in her chest like a second heartbeat she had not ordered, warm and certain and completely inconvenient. Her breath caught for half a second, just half, and then she straightened her spine and breathed out slow and steady. She looked at him. He looked at her. She watched his face go through something, recognition, and then calculation, and then something that looked disturbingly like a conclusion he had already reached before she walked into the room. He sat down. He did not stand up to greet her. He simply sat down in his chair at the head of the table, and 2 of his advisors arranged themselves at his shoulders like decorative furniture, and he looked at her with the expression of a man reviewing a trade agreement he had already decided to decline. "Lena of the eastern border," he said. His voice was low and even, no warmth in it, not even the performance of warmth. "I understand you have felt the bond." "I have," she said. Her voice came out level. She was proud of that. "Then I will not waste your time." He folded his hands on the table. "The Northern Pack cannot move forward with this bond. The border territories are politically unstable. The alliance would create more complications than it resolves. I have a responsibility to my pack first." He paused. "I trust you understand." She counted the pillars. 1, 2, 3. She got to 11 before she trusted her face again. "I understand completely," she said. She even managed something that resembled a polite nod. "Thank you for your time, Alpha King." She turned around and she walked out. The bond was still there in her chest, quiet now, sitting in the corner of her ribs like a piece of furniture nobody had arranged to have removed. She did not cry. She did not run. She walked to her horse. She tied her traveling bag, and she got back on the road before the sun had moved more than an inch across the sky. She reorganized her travel pack 3 times on the way home. The dried meat went to the left pocket, then the right, then back to the left. The compass went in the center. She moved it to the side. She moved it back. The bond sat quietly in her chest, and she moved her dried meat around, and that was the whole of what she allowed herself. She had learned a long time ago that grief was just energy looking for a task. 3 years passed. She was not the same person who had walked out of that hall, though she looked similar from the outside. She had spent those 3 years building something in the East. Not with anger. She had buried the anger inside the first 6 months, used it like fuel, and moved on when it ran out. She built with patience instead, with the particular stubbornness of someone who has been told no, and decided that no was simply a starting condition, not a conclusion. She earned a position as a senior trade delegate for the Eastern Border Council. She learned 3 different negotiating languages, 2 of them the hard way. She sat at tables with men twice her age, who underestimated her in the first 5 minutes, and regretted it by the end of the meeting. She did not enjoy their regret, exactly, but she did not mind it either. She was good at her job. That turned out to be enough to fill a life, at least enough to fill a day, and enough days strung together made something that looked, from certain angles, like contentment. The bond did not disappear. She had stopped expecting it to. It sat in her chest, like an old injury that ached a little in cold weather. Present, manageable, occasionally inconvenient. She learned to treat it like a piece of furniture. The Interpack Summit happened every 2 years, in the neutral grounds of the Central Valley. 12 packs, 3 days of negotiations, A great deal of formal dinners and careful language, and people saying things they did not mean, while meaning things they did not say. Lena arrived as a delegate. She had been to 2 summits before as a junior observer. This was her first time at the main table. She sat between the Eastern Council's chief delegate and a very quiet woman from the southern woodlands, who smelled like cedar and took precise notes on everything. The Northern Pack delegation arrived on the second morning. She knew he was in the room before she saw him. That was the annoying thing about the bond. It did not care what she thought about it. It announced him like a draft under a door, that particular pull in her chest that she had learned to breathe through the way you breathe through a cold wind. She kept her eyes on the trade document in front of her. She was mid-sentence in a point about border tariff restructuring when he walked through the door with his delegation, and she did not stop talking. She finished her sentence. She made her point. She looked up. He was already looking at her. She had known he would be. She gave him the same polite nod she had given him 3 years ago in the hall with 12 pillars, and then she turned back to the trade document and kept going. She heard later from the Southern Woodlands delegate that Alpha King Caelan had lost the thread of his own argument at one point and had to be prompted by his advisor twice. She did not smile when she heard this. She almost did. The Eastern King arrived on the afternoon of the second day. His name was Aldrich, King of the Eastern Mountain Packs, not the border territories where she was from, but the deep east, the high ground. He had ruled for 8 years, and had a reputation for being deliberate in everything he did, which was either wisdom or stubbornness, depending on whom you asked. She met him at the formal dinner. He sat across from her at a long table full of important people having careful conversations, and he did not try to be impressive. That was the first thing she noticed. Most of the men at tables like this were performing something. He was simply sitting there, eating his dinner, listening more than he spoke. Someone down the table made a comment about her background. Border territory. The way they said it carried the slight downward tilt that it always carried in rooms like this. She refilled her wine glass. Border territory, she confirmed. The way you confirm a weather report. Flat, informational. Aldrich looked at her from across the table, not with pity, with something that looked more like recognition, the look of someone who understood the specific weight those 2 words carried, and was choosing to register it. He did not say anything then. He waited until after dinner. "Walk the grounds with me," he said. Not a command, more of a suggestion offered carefully, like something that could be declined without consequence. She agreed, because she was practical, and walking cost nothing. He did not ask about her bond with the Northern King. She had expected him to. Everyone else had danced around it, or brought it up with false casualness, or used it as a lens through which to understand her. He didn't mention it at all. Instead, he asked what she was building in the East, what she wanted the border territories to look like in 20 years. Nobody had asked her the 20-year question before. She started to give a short, polite answer. The short, polite answer turned into something longer. She talked about water access and road infrastructure, and what happens to small communities when trade routes get redirected 20 miles to the north. She talked about what her mother's village had looked like before the border disputes, and what it had looked like after, and the difference between those 2 things. She had never said most of this out loud before. He listened the way people listen when they are actually storing the information. "That's a 20-year plan," he said when she finished. "It's a 30-year plan," she said. "I am optimistic." He smiled at that. A real one, not the performed kind. It changed his face entirely. They walked back to the hall in the dark, and she thought about practical things all the way there, and it did not help as much as it usually did. The summit ended. 3 weeks later, he sent a letter, not through official channels, a private letter, carried by one of his own riders. He wrote the way he spoke, deliberate, unhurried, no wasted words. He said he had been thinking about the 30-year plan. He said he thought it was achievable, and that he would like to hear more about the water access piece specifically. He said that if she was ever traveling through the eastern mountains, his hall was open. She read the letter twice. She wrote back. That was the beginning of something, though she would not have called it that at the time. She was careful with words like beginning. She folded the letter and put it in the same pocket as her compass, and tried not to read too much into the fact that those were the 2 things she kept in the center pocket. They wrote for 4 months. Then she made the trip through the eastern mountains on council business, and he met her at the road rather than waiting in the hall, which was not what she had expected. They sat in his map room for 3 hours, talking about water routes and pack infrastructure, and she did not notice the time passing until a servant came to light the lamps. She stayed an extra day, then another. On the 3rd day, he asked to walk the grounds with her again. She said yes again. This time he was quiet for a long stretch at the start, and she let the quiet sit, because she had learned that he used it the way other people used words, to take up space, to hold something, to get ready. Eventually he stopped walking, and he looked at her, and he said her name, just her name, and then he said, "If you'll have me." She stood there and she did the math. Not the emotional math. She had given up on emotional math a long time ago. The actual math. What this cost, what it built, what walking away from it looked like in 20 years, 30 years, the full length of a life. She had done that math in one form or another since she was 14 years old, in the border territories, eating snow off tree bark during a hard winter, calculating what she could afford to lose and what she could not. The math said yes. She said it out loud. The sacred bond was not like the fated bond. The fated bond had arrived in her chest like a second heartbeat she had not ordered. The sacred bond was different. It was slower. It was 2 people standing in front of the Eastern Mountain Pack elders and saying yes with full knowledge of the cost and full understanding that this was a door opening, not a wall coming down. It did not feel like destiny. It felt like a decision. She thought those might be the same thing, for people who had worked for everything they had. Doc. The formal notice arrived at the Northern Pack's Great Hall on a Tuesday. A courier. An official scroll with the Eastern Mountain seal. Alpha King Caelan read it at the table, in the same hall where he had told Lena of the eastern border, 3 years earlier, that the Northern Pack could not move forward with the bond. The hall had 12 pillars. He counted them. 1, 2, 3. He got to 12 this time. He sat with all 12 for a while. The bond thread, that faint residue of something he had rejected before he had properly looked at what he was rejecting, went quiet in his chest, not severed, just resolved. The way a debt resolves when someone else pays it with better currency than you ever offered. He had watched her at the summit. He had noticed the way she had kept talking when he walked into the room. He had noticed the way the Eastern King had listened to her at dinner, with the particular attention of someone taking notes on something valuable. He had noticed all of it and had said nothing, because there was nothing to say that would have been honest, and also useful, and he had learned a long time ago that those 2 categories rarely overlapped. He set the scroll down. He called his advisor in. He had a border tariff restructuring to finish. He had 3 other matters waiting. He had a pack to run, and responsibilities he had named out loud 3 years ago as the reason he had sat in his chair and folded his hands and let something walk out of his hall without standing up. He did not unchoose any of it. That was the thing about decisions. They were not reversible. They were only livable. Lena reorganized her travel pack one more time that winter. Dried meat, left pocket. Compass, center. Everything in its right place. She was in the Eastern Mountain King's map room, fire going low, the kind of cold outside that made the window glass weep with frost. Aldrich was on the other side of the fire, asking what she wanted the territory to look like in 50 years, which was a significant upgrade from the 20-year question, and she had not given him permission to upgrade the timeline. She told him that. He considered this seriously. 50 years seems reasonable, he said, given the water infrastructure timeline. She started to explain why that was presumptuous. The answer to the 50-year question came out of her, before the objection finished forming. It was a long answer. It had specifics in it. It had things in it she had not planned to say out loud yet. He was already storing it. The fire went lower. She pulled her coat tighter. Outside, the eastern mountains held the cold the way mountains always do, without complaint, without apology, simply because holding things was what they were built for. She thought that was a reasonable thing to be built for. She kept talking.